80s, I went to California to pursue acting. I actually did pretty well. Got a manager, an agent. First week I was there, I got a motion picture. I remember thinking to myself, what's the big deal? This isn't so hard. Well, then the writer's strike happened. Everything in Hollywood shut down. Certainly actors, producers, directors, costume people, florists, caterers. Nobody was working. So everybody started to get hungry, including me. Well, I subsidized my income by doing modeling work. And one particular job, makeup artist handed me her card. And she said, if you ever want to do any nude work, give this number a call and you can make some money. Well, I took it. I was grateful, thanked her, knowing full well that as soon as I did anything like that, it would ruin my career. Well, after about a month of starving, I decided that I was going to make that phone call. I had a can of beans and one can of potatoes in my cupboard, and I was hungry. So I made the phone call. They said, be at this place at a certain time. So I jumped on my motorcycle the next morning, and I went. And I made my first porno. I walked out of there at the end of the day with 4 crisp, brand new $100 bills. Got on my motorcycle, and I drove home. I was thinking how easy that was. But I also remember thinking, what have I done? Someday someone will find out. Well, little did I know that it would turn into this. I became the most popular, most decorated male adult film star of all time. The phone never stopped ringing. The money kept getting bigger and bigger. My mother had no idea. She was completely taken by storm, shocked her, hurt her. I didn't know what love was. I didn't even know if I could feel love anymore. I looked at women like objects. There was no emotion involved in the act of making love. What was that, making love? I had sex for money. I was a prostitute. I couldn't feel anymore. See, for me, I had to go to work to do the porn so that I could buy the drugs to bury the pain of doing the porn. So I'd go to work and do the porn so that I could buy the drugs to bury the pain. And around it went. What pornography did to me was it changed how I thought and felt about women. I began to look at them even more so as a sexual object. I lost the ability to have a loving and caring relationship. I thought I was still able, and I was fooled. One day, I left the set. I was done for the day. Got in my car, started it up, drove 2 blocks, pulled over and turned it off. And I started to cry. I wanted out so bad. I wanted to get off that merry-go-round. It's the last movie I ever made. And I never went back. I changed my life. I began my life. You see, if I can change my heart, anybody can.
All right, so that was a very interesting. Um, well, hold on here. I'm gotta figure how to bring this back up. I'm not at the office. They sent us home from the office, so I've got to figure out now. I don't have my double screen. How to get this back up? Hmm. Aha. There we go. All right. So that indeed is a fascinating little video. I think for a couple reasons. For one, I think it's fascinating simply because you rarely see testimonials from men regarding what they perceive to be the harmful effects of pornography on them, especially those involved who have done porn, who have been actors in pornographic films. You get online, you try to look around to hear some firsthand accounts, to read some testimonials of people, right? The vast majority are women. And here's a guy talking about it. You wouldn't normally expect that given sort of the stereotypes that are out there about that if there is any harm done in this sort of thing, it's really just, just for women. Guys don't care. Guys get over it. It's just who guys are. It's what guys are. And Greg Dushel here, which is his name, his stage name is Randy Spears, but his real name is Greg Dushel. Um, he shows otherwise and talks about how pornography has harmed him incredibly. Um, I wanted to show that video just as sort of a segue to Susan Brison's position against pornography. It's her position philosophically is pretty much the same thing that Greg Dushel is giving us colloquially. That is that pornography is a very bad thing because of the harm that it causes. Right. The focus here is on the harm. I also think it's interesting in that video, the organization that put it together and produced it is called Fight the New Drug. And they have a website. I think it's fightthenewdrug.org. The interesting thing about that organization, it's not a religious organization, it's not a philosophical organization. It's actually an organization put together um, that's sort of, how would I put this? Based in sort of cognitive science, brain science, in the sense that it's a group of people who have come together that are noting how that um, the consumption of pornography affects brain chemistry in ways that opiates, drugs, affect brain chemistry. And there's been a lot of research and a lot of articles published in high-profile medical and chemistry journals, cognitive science journals, I should say, that have proven that have argued that that it's very similar, and that's one of the reasons why pornography can be as addicting as uh, various kinds of opiates, because the same sort of chemical is being released in the brain when someone consumes it. So fascinating. So that's the angle that that organization is looking at here, is not necessarily sort of the religious or personal aspects of it, although right those things are relevant, but rather sort of the addicting aspect of it, right? That's what they're honed in on. So anyway, some fascinating stuff there. It gives us a lot to think about as we go through today's lecture. Um, so yeah, the question is, does porn, really harm people? And by the way, here is um, the link to that we just watched. So what we want to look at today is Susan Brison's response to Andrew Altman. Andrew Altman, the philosopher at Georgia State, has argued that sexual autonomy is this overarching moral principle, that really everything that has anything to do with sexuality falls under that umbrella. Uh, we have the freedom, we have the rights, we have the liberty to do whatever we want sexually, so long as children or non-consenting adults are not part of that. Okay. So really anything goes, frankly, that don't fall under those two exclusions. Well, Susan Bryson is a professor at Dartmouth College. Been there for many years, and she has been a very high-profile, uh, virulent, uh, virulent opponent of pornography. And I think you see it especially in sort of how that she defines pornography, right? And this is really interesting. Altman gave a very sort of technical definition of what pornography is. And if you remember, he is trying to define pornography as um, uh, sexually explicit material that has been made with the intended purpose of arousal, right? That's what makes pornography pornography. Is specifically, it has that intention that's been put into it by its creators, right, to arouse people. Bryson, however, is defining pornography not necessarily sort of as in a technical way, but as a consequentialist, right, which she is. I think that's really important to understand here as well, is that Altman comes at this from a more deontological perspective. What are our rights and duties, right? These are hugely important for him understanding how it works. For Bryson, rights and duties don't play a role here really at all, principally, but maybe as a consequence, because ultimately what she's concerned with is what the effects are of pornography. And so her definition is really based on what she perceives or what she judges to be the effects of the proliferation of pornography in our culture. And thus she defines pornography as violent, degrading, misogynistic hate speech. So there's a lot in that definition. So let's just unpack it really quickly. That it's violent, right, has to do with what she perceives to be the harm that is done, right? That's what makes it violent. It's degrading. Um, it's degrading in the sense that it explicitly grades or values um, in a lesser and lesser in a lesser way, right? The object of it. But what's the object? Well, that's what she's getting at in the next term, misogynistic, which is anti-woman. So it's violent, harmful, degrading in value women, anti-women, and even ramps it up a further notch by calling it hate speech, right? It's hate speech really against women. So a uh, pretty robust definition in that sense, right? So what are these elements? Well, I just went through them. And so what Bryson argues then is that the harm that is created by pornography, the harm that is brought about by pornography, really overrides anyone's right to create it or consume it. Okay? In other words, it's just too dangerous. It's too harmful. It's too big of a problem. And the bigness of the problem, the bigness of the harm, the bigness um, of the violence she perceives to be resulting from it overrides whatever one's right anybody has under sexual autonomy or whatever. Okay, it's just too hot to handle, as the old timers would put it. So here's the question we have to ask and answer then, first of all, right? Does porn really harm people? We saw in Altman's article that he sort of waffles on that issue, right? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. We need a little bit more data to be sure. But even if it does harm at the end of the day, that does not take away people's right to do whatever they want to do sexually. Right? So this is the sort of tension that he is perfectly fine with. Well, Bryson says, to answer the question if pornography really does harm people, consider a few things. First of all, consider the first person testimonials of those people who are participants in pornography. Okay? Think about, for instance, people like Greg Douchel, the testimonial we just watched. It's very interesting to see how, for him, it was uh, very um, uh, intriguing at first, and yet over time he came to understand and realize that it was having harmful effects on him personally, but he needed to work, he needed the money, he needed to maintain a lifestyle. And so he looked for very self-destructive, or as he put it, sort of had to end up engaging in very self-destructive behaviors in order to maintain his ability to keep on doing this, right? To keep on doing the porn, to keep on making that money, to do what it took to make that money. Okay. So this is indeed um, the sort of, as he puts it, the never-ending circle, the sort of craziness uh, that he got himself into, this spiral, this just going around and around and around that was um, really, really destructive of himself. And he's not the only one, right? There's all sorts of testimonials of other people involved in pornography over the years that have pretty much said the same thing. So, excuse me. So this is something we have to take account of. Does pornography really harm people? Well, according to many people who have been involved in it and gotten out of it, they would argue that yes, it's incredibly harmful in this way. Also, think about, as Bryson puts it, think about those cases we know of where people get trapped in porn. I mean, there's a sense in which Dushel sort of got trapped in porn, um, in the sense in which he's talking about there. Um, it's very common, and we're seeing it more and more, especially as we see uh, police authorities cracking down on human trafficking, that there are many cases of that, for instance, that all start from a young girl who uh, has problems, tensions, conflict at home, either with family or boyfriends or things, whatever of that nature, and runs away, sort of gets herself out of that situation, and sort of ends up in porn through sort of a chain reaction of putting confidence in people who take advantage of her. This is a very common thing. I'm reading stories on this. It seems like every couple of weeks as I trying to keep current on what's going on, even in our culture, regarding these issues of pornography and how so much of it is made. Indeed, I mean one of the highest category selling genres of pornography is what's called amateur porn, and it literally is what you think it is. It's amateur, right? And there is always the need for further new people, brand new amateurs, to sort of fulfill the need that the market has placed on that particular genre. Lots of demand for it. So yeah, so it's an old saw. It's a common story. Girl runs away from home, befriends some guy who shows some interest in her, takes a few nudes on his phone, then maybe sells them to an amateur site, maybe ramps it up to someone then who wants to serve as sort of an agent or a pimp or a pornographer, and it even goes to the higher up levels in terms of how serious, right, that this girl will get involved in this kind of behavior, in this kind of occupation, if you want to put it that way. Um, and sort of gets trapped in it that way. Or the Craigslist ads looking for models. I don't see these as much anymore, but as soon as a couple years, or as lately as a couple of years ago, I saw this as I was sort of searching around on different Craigslist sites, different cities for this. And here's how this works. So under the occupations tab, there often will be a link for, looking for models, and all the ad will say is um, that this is a model agency, which is not necessarily false. They're not necessarily lying, but they don't give you the full explanation there in the ad itself. But they say we're a model agency. We're looking for 18, 19-year-old women who would be interested in doing various kinds of modeling. Please inquire. And so you inquire, and they will get back to you and say, yep, send us a few, G-rated photos of yourself. So you do that, and they'll email you back if they like them, and they'll say, okay, well, here's the deal. We're down here in Miami, or we are in Los Angeles, or New Orleans, or these are some major places where this goes on. And they'll say, well, we will send you a contract. I mean, it's all legit. Or I say all. I think a lot of it is legit. Say we'll send you a contract and some money, and what the contract says is that you'll come down here for, we'll fly you down here, all expenses paid for, 5, 6, 7 days. We'll talk about the business. We'll do some shoots, and then at that point, you can decide if you'd like to keep going or not. So you get down there, and then that's when they reveal that they're doing porn. They're not forcing anybody to do that, but they have all kinds of other people that are there doing porn, and they encourage you to go ahead with it, to do a movie or two, um, to give you some pointers on how to do it. Uh, no pun intended. To do the porn, I guess. Right. In other words, it's very professional, but nonetheless, it's a sort of thing where you're 1,000 miles away from home. They have $100 bills on the table. They want to give you these $100 bills because they want you to take your clothes off and perform sex acts on camera. In a way, it's a kind of entrapment. At least that's the argument there. It's not like you can just kind of get in your car and go back to mom's house, right? I mean, you're already there. You need the money. You may be running away from something. It's it's sort of the best deal you've got maybe going for you at the time. And so this sort of trap ends up, as the argument goes, it ends up like what Greg Dusha was talking about. It's just you keep doing it, and once you've started doing it, can you feel like you can really go back to a quote unquote normal job back in your hometown? Um, can you go back to being a dental hygienist after doing, 3 or 4 months of X-rated hardcore pornography? I mean, I guess you can, but what these people are saying is that it's just not that easy to do that. It's not that easy to flip the switch like that. And then a third way in which pornography harms, right? And I talked a little bit about this already, is sex trafficking. And what we know about sex trafficking is that it's a very real thing. I mean, even in our area, um, the interstate between New Orleans and Atlanta, which runs right through Birmingham, right, is a huge conduit for sex trafficking in the United States. How does it work? Well, uh, a lot of it has to do with with women from Asia who take advantage of sort of their own Craigslist ads over there, in a sense, in China, in South Korea, uh, Taiwan, Thailand, especially Thailand, and other places where women there in poverty don't really have a whole lot of options on what to do with their lives, don't have a lot of options to support their family. So they inquire with agencies over there who will, all expenses paid, all take care of the visas, take care of all the immigration stuff, pay for all of them to come to the United States to be trained as massage therapists, to get legitimate state licenses and credentials as massage therapists, and end up in massage establishments where prostitution and amateur pornography is conducted, where it's done. Of course, the tricky thing about it is that once they get here, the people who have brought them here will seize and keep all of their passports, all of their documents. We'll seize all of their funds. We'll cut off their ability to contact family back home. And so they really are trapped. They're told, we'll give you your phone back. We will give you your passports back, your credentials, all of that back. We will actually pay you, but you have to do all of this work for us first um, to pay us back for getting you here to begin with, right? And it's sort of a never-ending chain of of use and abuse, right? These people indeed are exploited, and and pornography is a huge factor in how this works and how it's done and why it's done. As people like Bryson argue, and then there's been a lot of other people argue this as well, that if it wasn't for the proliferation of pornography, that there wouldn't be as much of the issue of sex trafficking as there is, right? It really fuels it. As they see the data anyway, as they interpret the data, it's the proliferation of pornography that really fuels sex trafficking, as well as all of these other harms that Bryson sees. What about consent, though? I mean, this is life, right? These people are not necessarily always being held as slaves, right? I mean, they've consented to this behavior. They've consented to this treatment, right? They have come out and said, we indeed choose to do this. We're coming in eyes wide open. We know what's going on, what happens, right? Nonetheless, this is sort of the best deal for us, right? So we consent to it. I'm consenting to it. For classical traditional liberals like Altman, right? This is the crux, right? This is the issue that whenever you consent to something, you indeed are consenting to whatever the outcome is, as well as what gets you that outcome, right? That's just how life works. Well, Bryson says, on one hand, some people do genuinely consent. Some people have all the information. Some people have what they need in order to make a very informed, consensual decision. But what about the fact that porn has an incredible influence in how non-consenting people are treated, and how those who don't consent to neither the creation nor the consumption of pornography, right? How that they are treated as a result of that. Um, Consider an example, and this is where Bryson gets a little bit explicit here, and it's a little bit of an explicit example, but she thinks that this is going to help us sort of conceptualize or understand the point she's trying to make. What if, for instance, that you get on Netflix, let's say, and you are given all these sorts of subgenres of movies, right? You can look up for a comedy or a romantic comedy or a thriller comedy or a thriller scary movie or a thriller drama or a drama comedy or a drama, right? You know where I'm going here, a documentary or whatever, right? There's all these different categories of movies that you can watch. Well, what if there was a distinct category, and what the movies in that category were about uh, narratives of white people who owned and tortured black slaves? It's not real life. It's just a movie. It's just a subgenre of film. And the reason why this kind of film is created is in order to capture the market of white supremacist neo-Nazi viewers. Okay. So we've got this subgenre of film where white owners torture black slaves, and it's really all for the enjoyment of neo-Nazi viewers. Well, what would you say about that? I don't mind saying that the idea really kind of turns my stomach as I think about this. However, all of the actors are consenting to playing their roles, right? They're all doing this. The white actors are consent. They sign the contract. They're getting paid. The black actors sign the contract. They consent to it. They're getting paid. As a society, would we tolerate this? That's I think that's kind of an iffy question. I think some would bite the bullet like Altman and say, well, if they're consenting, then so be it. Um, I think a lot of people would say, no, we wouldn't tolerate this as a society. Well, here's a much different question. Should we tolerate this? Bryson's point here is that really we shouldn't, given how already difficult it is, and a difficult struggle it has been in the history of our country to um, to reach any semblance of racial reconciliation. Um, you might argue that things are better now than they ever have been in the past in the country's history, but yet we know that there's a long way to go when it comes to the work that's left to do. Um, so anyway, right? I mean, given how hard fought and hard won whatever success we've had in racial reconciliation has been, right? Seems like producing these kinds of movies, having them out there on the open market, would just really sort of uh, reverse course when it has come to all the work that we've done for racial reconciliation. So he thinks we shouldn't do that sort of thing. Well, apply that to porn then, right? I mean, let me go back to that then. So those who would not consent to these kinds of movies, think about those African American, those black citizens, neighbors of our community that would not consent to this kind of thing. How might they then be treated because there is this sort of subgenre of film? Well, the argument is that they'd be treated horribly, right? That there would be um, a sort of um, understanding that oh yeah, they're the people that get treated that way in that film as they're being portrayed, and that these who indeed have not consented to their creation, to their consumption, would nonetheless feel the harmful effects of it just by living in a community where that stuff is available. Right? I mean, that seems like it would be pretty obvious just given our common sense understanding of how the world works. Well, it's the same. It's the same in porn. It's the same regarding how women get treated on a daily basis in various contexts because of the proliferation of pornography and how women are often portrayed in pornographic roles. That's Bryson's point here. So let's talk now about porn's indirect harms. As Bryson sees it, porn indeed does directly harm people who consume it, right? And as well as create it, right? There are direct harms, but also she thinks there are indirect harms in this way as well. Think about those who are harmed, who are forced to view it, right? That really don't consent to it. Think about reinforced, perpetuated discrimination and abuse of females. This is a lot of sort of the criticism that Catherine McKinnon had of Andrew Altman in Altman's article, as he is sort of anticipating her criticism that um, that as hard fought and as hard won women's rights have been in the West, in the context of the United States, for instance, over the last many years, that the stereotypes that regard women as sexual objects and pretty much nothing more um, is reinforced. It's perpetuated. It's continued on. It's carried on throughout history, throughout the future. It's carried on even now because of the availability of pornography. And so many women who indeed have nothing to do with porn nonetheless suffer the effects of it. They are indirectly harmed by it. Think also of the males who are harmed simply because pornography has created in them or fostered in them attitudes towards women, um, and those attitudes being influenced by the specific aspects of the porn. I think one of the things that I'm seeing more and more in the data is how that pornography is affecting relationships, for instance, between men and women, close relationships, dating relationships, marriage relationships, so on and so forth, because of the kinds of sexual expectations that pornography um, sort of fosters in males who view it. Um, and, at least anyway, right? This is a testimonial that I'm seeing over and over again, often. Uh, that indeed what pornography does is that in this sense it creates or it offers sort of uh, the basis of of fantasy fulfillment on the screen that frankly isn't normal. It isn't real life sex. It's portrayed on the screen, but it really doesn't happen with real people, right? It's somewhat fictional, even though it's the real things going on. It's somewhat fictional. Again, going back to Altman's piece, why is it fictional in that sense at least? Why is it focusing on certain kinds of fantasies and making those real at least on the screen? Well, it's because those are in demand. That's what the market wants, right? It's pornographers are only going to create and sell what can be sold, what people will buy. And oftentimes, what people will buy regarding pornography is what they can't get in real life. And so, the kinds of expectations that are created here cause tensions in relationships. And also, fourthly, it harms those who are already victims of sexual violence, right? And which are many people, and that list is growing of people who indeed have sexual violence in their past, and the proliferation of pornography just keeps on sort of gouging those wounds in people who have suffered in that way. I think at the end of the day, it's probably fair, as Bryson notes here, probably fair to say that the proliferation of pornography itself has a desensitizing effect. It's really sort of desensitized us to the explicitness, to the intimate nature of various aspects that go on in a sexual relationship, right? That it sort of makes everything much more old hat, makes us much more sort of calloused to certain things. Maybe callous is not the best word, but I can't really think of anything else to um, explain what I'm thinking here. Calloused, or I guess it makes it seem normal, makes everything just seem ho hum. Maybe I can put it that way. And so it desensitizes us to the specifics that are involved. So responding to Altman, then, remember, Altman says the harm that we get by porn, and by we get, what I mean here is whoever gets, right? Whatever harm is created by pornography is simply just the price that we pay for sexual autonomy. Just like the price we pay for having police departments is that a very few minority of police officers are corrupt and commit evil, break the law. That's the price we pay for having the police. Um, the price we pay for having um, vaccines is that some people will suffer the negative effects of those vaccines. We don't want that. It's just the price we pay for having this great benefit. So similarly, then, right? Whatever harm comes about by pornography is just the price we pay for being free people and being able to choose what we want to choose, right? That's just how it is. Bryson, however, says, Altman, you are wrong. And here's the reason why you're wrong about that. She says, sexual autonomy does not protect everything sexual as morally equal. And I think that's the sort of thing that Bryson wants to hone in on here. Altman is looking at sexual autonomy as sort of this blanket concept. But Bryson is saying, pretty much that what Altman is doing is he's conflating everything sexual, um, barring, children and non-consenting adults, but everything else sexual as having a sort of equal moral value, as equally morally protected under sexual autonomy. But Bryson says surely that's not the case. Consider, for instance, first of all, you know, where would we put the right to pornography? If we thought that people did indeed had a right to it, a right to create it and consume it, where would we place that right on a moral spectrum? So if we were in class, for instance, right now, I would go up on the whiteboard and I would draw just a straight line from left to right. And at the very left end of that line, I would put, here's the point of pure moral evil. And at the very right end of that line, I'd put, here's the point of pure moral goodness. And if we're going to place all kinds of things on this spectrum, then between pure moral goodness and pure moral evil, we would do this arbitrarily in class. I'd ask you guys, I'd say, well, where would we put, cheating on an exam? I think most students would put it, closer to moral evil than to moral good, but not all the way at moral evil. What if I asked you where would we place, helping a little old lady cross the street? Well, that we'd place that on the spectrum towards the right, towards pure moral good. Maybe not absolute morally good in and of itself, but close to it, right? It's a good thing. Or what if I asked you, where would we place on this moral spectrum firebombing in elementary school? I know that's a horrible thing to think about, isn't it? But extreme examples sometimes help us understand these concepts. We'd probably put that closer to the left end of that line, wouldn't we? Closer towards pure moral evil, if not right at pure moral evil. Well, where would we put one's right or one's consumption of pornography? Interestingly enough, most people actually put it closer to evil than they do to good, although it's closer in the middle, but usually leaning more to the left of middle, okay? Which is kind of interesting. So if that's the case, then that sort of proves the point that Bryson is making here, um, in that if indeed it's something that people have a right to, the sort of moral nature of it, where we place it on a moral spectrum, um, kind of shows that it's not the kind of right that requires of the rest of us responsibilities to protect, or at least to nurture that right, or or to or it's not a right held against us such that we have to make sure that we have a responsibility to make sure that people have complete and total access to exercise that right. That's just not the case. For instance, she says, what if my 21-year-old son absolutely loved porn? I mean, was really into it, such that this 21-year-old son of mine, he's not into Iron Man, he's not into Batman, he's not into sports, he's into porn. And indeed, for his 21st birthday party, he doesn't want a Batman birthday cake, he doesn't want an Iron Man birthday cake, he wants a porn birthday cake. Okay? Uh, yeah, that's an interesting concept, isn't it? What a birthday party that might be to go to. Um, what does his right really require of me? Indeed, say he's home summer break from college and he is wanting to view pornography because that's what he's into, and I have a firewall on the internet router in my house that does not let explicit sites come up. Am I really depriving him of his moral right to view pornography? Do I really have a moral responsibility to allow him and to make sure that his right to view it has been protected? Of course not. Of course not. That's her point here. So already then we think we believe that this is not the sort of thing that people have an unrestricted right to, simply because uh, undergirding it is where we would place it on the sort of moral spectrum. Also, secondly, Bryson says, consider this question: is there anything special about sexual arousal, or even just arousal itself, that gives it a special moral status? You know, so think about this question in this way. We generally think that things like uh, the free expression of religion, one's practicing of their religion, is something that is very intrinsic um, to what it is to be, a free person or free, right? That these are sorts of really foundational aspects, really of what we would call a human right, I suppose. But we wouldn't generally think that arousal is the kind of thing in and of itself that is a very fundamental and foundational human right. That is, that it has this kind of moral status that is protected from all kinds of restrictions, from all kinds of conditions in this sense. Um, in other words, or for example, you know, consider what about arousal may be caused by racial animus that's non-sexual, going back to that example of different kinds of subgenres of films. What if you're a person that's just really into watching movies of black people getting beaten up by white people, to use Bryson's example there, right? That really arouses you to see that sort of thing. Is that protected under the furniture or structure of morality itself, right? Do you have an absolute moral right to that, such that the rest of us have a responsibility to make sure you have access to that? Well, absolutely not. We don't think that at all. Why? Well, because as Bryson says, right, she thinks there's no right, there's no fundamental moral right that you have to have any kind of pleasurable feeling that would override others' rights to not be harmed. Right? If there was some kind of pleasurable feeling that you had, indeed, that you liked to have, but ultimately caused lots of harm in other people's lives, you wouldn't have a right to that pleasurable feeling. At least Bryson thinks that's the case and thinks that we would probably agree with that. Related to that second point, then, is a third one. This third question here: are bodily pleasures immutable? That is, are they in of themselves uh, perfect and complete and um, have such a status that they cannot, may not be restricted? In other words, they are absolutely intrinsically always justifiable and acceptable, right? Are all kinds of whatever um, your body desires, whatever kinds of pleasure can satisfy that desire, is satisfying that desire intrinsically always morally okay? And of course, the answer to that is absolutely not, right? For instance, you don't have a right to anything or to eat anything that gives you pleasure, to use her example here. Um, might give you pleasure to eat other human beings, but you don't have a right to do that. Um, it might give you pleasure to eat the food in other people's pantries, right? But you don't have a right to do that. That's called theft, right? So we already don't think that bodily pleasures themselves are absolutely okay to satisfy. Almost anything can be a turn on. Think about that here. This is Bryson's point again, right? Almost anything can arouse. And I think that just looking at the various categories of genres of pornography sort of proves this point, that the pornography market itself is trying to satisfy the demand for all these different kinds of things that people want. Corpses, right? Dead people turn on, sexually turn on other people who are into that. Watching minors being tortured can be a turn on. Watching black men be lynched can be a turn on, right? There's all kinds of things that can be a turn on that can arouse people. And yet it would seem that, according to Altman, all of these things are morally protected under the banner, under the umbrella of sexual autonomy. All of these things, in and of themselves, have this sort of protected moral status because they would all fit under sexual autonomy again, right? Remember, Altman says that the amount of harm really doesn't matter here, that the amount of harm uh, does not in any way infringe people's rights to consume and create this stuff, right? Because it all falls under the umbrella of sexual autonomy. But this is where Bryson thinks that we can come up with examples really to sort of help us poke holes at Altman's overarching claim. What about CGIs, right? Computer generated images or animations, cartoons, or whatever that are literally made up, right? So, for example, what about animated pornography that is portraying a 50-year-old man and an 8-year-old girl in a rape setting? Okay, very disturbing. But this would be something that's literally made up, right? It's not actually being done on camera on screen because there's not actual persons doing this. It's literally just digital ink in a digital machine portraying uh, these actions, portraying this behavior. Then is that cool? Is that protected? Right? Nobody's actually being harmed. Well, it would seem like it'd be okay for Altman, especially, right? I mean, no actual minor is being harmed. No actual non-consenting person is being forced into this because it literally is just made up by a computer. Um, so would we be willing to say then that under this banner of sexual autonomy that, hey, that's cool, it's all good? Well, I don't know. It's tough. Probably not, because of just how icky that is. And we could think about, oh my gosh, this seemingly would possibly really encourage maybe even this kind of behavior if this indeed is what people get off on, if this is what arouses them and what they're getting into. Well, what about products then that appeal to morally dubious fantasies. So let's ramp this up a notch. And this is the last slide I have for you today. And I apologize for the disturbing nature of it, but I think this is really important to point out. This is a sex doll that is made in Eastern Europe. Um, there's currently some of these in the United States. I think various agencies have started trying to crack down on this lately. Um, Not sure about that. I need to look into that again. But anyway, this is a very controversial thing. This is silicone. It's rubber. It's synthetic materials. This is not an actual human being. It's not an actual person. It's an inanimate object. However, that is portrayed to look like and represent a very young girl, obviously. It is anatomically made. It is anatomically correct, right? In the sense that this is made to be used in as well for sexual intercourse. Let me just throw it out there. Should this kind of thing be morally okay? Does this sort of thing require of society um, that we have a responsibility to protect the sale and use of these kinds of products for those men and women who want to use these kinds of products? If Altman is right, this is not an actual minor, this is not a non-consenting adult. If Altman is right that sexual autonomy protects all things sexual, well, then it protects this. This should be allowed to be bought and sold in our communities. This should be allowed to be used for people's sexual purposes in our communities because sexual morality indeed protects it. Bryson, however, thinks that your response is going to be this takes it a step too far. This is just too much. This is going to cause harm. This is not good. And if that's the case, if you agree with Bryson, then indeed you disagree with Altman. Anyway, um, what questions, what concerns you guys have? What do you want to talk about in sort of the aftermath of this topic that we've been looking at here? Let me open the floor up to you guys. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Joseph asks, so aren't both positions somewhat extreme? Um, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they really be that extreme. I mean, either it is acceptable or it isn't. Um, Either pornography should be available or it shouldn't be. I mean, that's really the question here. I mean, you raise a good question. I'm just trying to think it out loud here. I mean, it's the sort of thing that we have for people to do, or we don't have people to do. So you say, consider alcohol. We have a drinking age. Well, that's true, but and for the pornography that is available, there's also a right. It's illegal to view this stuff if you're under 18 years old, if you're under 21 years old, in certain instances. Um, so yeah, I mean, all the restrictions that are on alcohol indeed are on sexually explicit material, right? That's for sure. Um, so the question is, right? As you see, what do you say? Alcohol is legal, but you must be 21 to purchase or consume it. Yeah, sure. And how restrictive is that? How let's be honest, how well does that work? Um, I've been a college professor for 10 years, and I can tell you that the fact that the law books say you have to be 21 is very ineffective here, right? Um, yeah, and so I would argue that the same would apply, I think, to this as well, right? The proliferation of pornography, right? Let's be honest, there's 11 and 12-year-olds that have a smartphone that are looking at all this stuff, right? Um, so it's very accessible. I think age restrictions really don't play a role at all in this sort of thing. Yes, but Bryson's position is all pornography is wrong. Not disagreeing with it, but it seems like all encompassing. Yeah. Um, Remember, though, however, that she is defining pornography as violent, degrading, misogynistic hate speech. So maybe there's certain kinds of porn that she wouldn't define as porn in that way. And of course, we don't know, right? She doesn't really give us all those details. Um, but maybe she does see all of anything with the intent to arouse. If she were to even talk about Altman's definition there, so let's think about this for a second. Anything that has the intent to arouse, she might would say, is going to inevitably sort of end up requiring the production of the kind of porn that she is talking about, because um, because that's what the market demand is. The market demand is for products like this one on the screen. The market demand is for violent porn, for rape scenes, for amateur porn that indeed fuels um, a lot of sex trafficking that goes on. Yeah, so I don't think she's going to see a lot of distinction between sort of legitimate porn and illegitimate porn, simply because of how just the nature of it, as it has been left. I mean, it's completely legal in this country, right? And the market itself determines what it is. There's companies out there that make it, so just let it do what it's going to do. Is what pretty much we have done. I mean, when you think about it, porn is one of the least regulated things that there are um, uh, in this country. I mean, it's sort of fascinating how that we have more regulations on farmers who grow corn than we do on the pornography business itself. Um, and so when you let it do what it's going to do, then it's done what it's done, and it has fueled a lot of these kinds of effects that she sees as being illegitimate in that way. And your point, Joseph, is very well put. I mean, you're exactly right, in the sense that it indeed is all encompassing. Like, she sees no redeeming qualities, she sees no middle ground whatsoever, and that's true. And the reason is because she doesn't care about that. What she cares about is, look at the consequences, look at the effects. That's what's driving her to make the claims that she's making here. Really good points. Other thoughts or questions? All right. Well, if not, hey, you all enjoy your week. Um, Enjoy the rest of your day.